see his box either.
Oh, there we go.
We live?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. We're
Go for
live.
it.
This is how you do it when you work on a web show. This is the Fantasy Dilemma. I am Courtney Fallon, and that is Nate Hamilton. He is the fantasy expert, and I feel like Nate this week just continues. What a 2020 week. Week 12 of fantasy is still going on.
Never ending.
We woke up and we're still doing 2020. The Steelers have officially now, since it's 8 o'clock Eastern time, they got on their plane. They're on a flight from Baltimore to Pittsburgh. They had another positive test from a player and personnel on the team, but apparently they already had flagged these two as potential positives. So now we get the confirmation. Hopefully this spread, it stops for the well-being of everyone in that organization. But, this causes a lot of stress and drama for fantasy football owners because, you're playing a Wednesday at 3 o'clock, 3:40 football game, and you're still banking on players from the Steelers and the Ravens. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know what? You actually just brought up a good point, is the safety and health of everybody. Because I think we're pretty relentless as fantasy football players and analysts, where we're just like, this is just screwing up our work, right? It's just screwing up our fantasy lineups. And really, when it comes down to it, there are real people dealing with health issues. And obviously, I think they're healthy enough to beat it. But I think that's first and foremost, let's just hope that everybody's healthy. But yeah, this is definitely screwed up week 12. There's no beating around the bush about it. The fact that, it's now pushed out to Wednesday, and that's the day before week 13 starts. So it's been an interesting start to, or an end to week 12, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and also too, to note, let's get into the players that are, featured on this docket, especially for the Baltimore Ravens. There is a lot of talk about RG3 stepping in. Lamar Jackson will not be available. However, JK Dobbins and Mark Ingram are now eligible to play. But the expectation really is that Gus Edwards is going to carry the majority of the load. I am hearing people say possibly that Justice Hill, who is the fourth string running back, who's now been kind of launched into that second running back spot, is also kind of a sneaky play. But at this point, how confident would you be to play any of these running backs for the Baltimore Ravens?
No, so I think we were talking about it before the show started. And I think for me, Justice Hill is like the sexy DFS play if JK Dobbins and Mark Ingram weren't playing. But the fact that they are now probably going to be active for this game, they've been, reinstated off the COVID list. I think it just muddies the water for everybody involved. In RG3, we know Lamar Jackson's not going to be quarterback for the Ravens. So RG3 being the quarterback, I think, as I said before we even went live here, is that I think that there's a good chance he panic rushes on a lot of plays, which really destroys any receiving option and anybody in the backfield. So, because I know, Courtney, you don't really trust anybody coming off COVID. You might see limited reps from them, but now we're talking about 4 players involved, and it's going to be a complete running back by committee, and we just don't know who that guy is going to be.
Yeah, especially it doesn't bode well for the Baltimore Ravens. The Steelers are a very bully ball, punch you in the mouth kind of team. They get very physical at the line of scrimmage. So, we're not talking about lines here, but that is a double-digit line gambling sense. But, so that's an interesting game for tomorrow night. What about on the other side of the ball for the Steelers? Who do you see getting the majority of – all right, who do you expect? Is it Deontay Johnson? Is it Juju Smith-Schuster? Or Chase Claypool? They got a trio of firepower wide receivers on that team. Who do you expect to have a big game tomorrow night for this?
I still think it's going to be a Juju kind of game. Excuse me. I think Juju Smith-Schuster is probably in line because – as far as we know, the majority of the defense for the Ravens are intact, right? So, and they've been pretty damn good against the run. And that's why I was worried about James Conner the last week when you and I talked about this game that was supposed to happen almost a week ago, that I was a little worried about James Conner. So I think that Juju is a safe play. Obviously, any of the receiving options for Big Ben in this game, I think, is a good choice. But for me, like, as far as fantasy football goes, this is the way I've handled it. I've actually benched Juju Smith-Schuster in a few leagues because of how this game has been pushed out so many times.
Yeah.
To the point where it's just too risky to play, because if they don't play this game on Wednesday, you're probably taking a 0 from any, Raven or Pittsburgh Steeler that you have in there. And as frustrating as that is, I don't know. Like, I'm in a dynasty league where our commish actually said, "Hey, I know there's a red flag on this game, so announce your alternates right now if these guys don't go." And I think that's the best way to handle it. I know it's a little too late for that for that advice, but I think going forward, especially with situations with COVID, I think it's very important for you to have an alternate in place and report those things to the league and your commissioner, just in case a game gets pushed out further than the week that it's supposed to be played.
Yeah, Michael Fabiano is the commissioner of my league in a all women's on-air talent league, which has been fantastic. However,
that's awesome.
I just can't win. I scored 138 points last week. Last week, I got beat suddenly by a 163. I think there's maybe been 2 times that anyone in the league has scored that many points. This week, I kind of secured it, though. Humble fantasy brag.
I mean,
before we get into the games,
Tyreek Hill, right?
Tyreek Hill. I have the Atlanta Falcons defense, which gave me 27 points. And Aaron Rodgers last night threw a cool 4 touchdowns. So 27, 28 points right there. But I'm still like 4-8. So I can't win. I can't win in that situation. I'm not like, I'm still getting there. What about you?
All right. So that's a hit for you, right?
No, oh yeah. No, this was a hit.
You were the Tyreeker. Okay. I was Tyreeked. Okay.
Oh, you were Tyreek.
Yeah. I'm in. So my family league, right? Which is like, it's actually a big buy-in. And we take it very seriously. And I was facing
Grandpa counts his pennies pretty seriously.
I mean,
sure that you don't take him.
Very true. But I was facing my little brother, and he had Tyreek Hill.
Oh,
and typically Tyreek scores 20, 25. That's a damn solid good game. Like, that's like, even if you get 15 out of them, that's pretty damn good. Yeah. 74.9 points.
Wow.
Just from Tyreek Hill. Before the game started, I was slated to win by 40, and I'm losing by over 60 points, and he still has Pittsburgh Steelers defense to go. So, I mean, it's just, and I'm going to go from probably 3rd place in that league down to 5th at least after that loss. So it's, Tyreek was, as awesome as it was to watch him, it was devastating for me because I was just watching my season just go down the drain.
Can you ask this to your fantasy football followers and anyone that's in your audience? I just really want to know. Has anyone had Tyreek Hill from this last week and they lost? Like, is that mathematically possible?
You want to know something? I did ask the question on Twitter. I did say, who else was Tyreeked yesterday? And people are saying, I was Tyreeked, but I also had, Aaron Rodgers and Derrick Henry. So they still have a chance to win, which is crazy. It's like, so people are actually surviving that performance, which to me, that's like the definition of a hands down. That was almost a NFL record setting game for Tyreek Hill.
Did they not say that? And this confuses me. And I'm sure that there was fantasy football in the 90s, but they said that the most points ever by a fantasy football player was Jerry Rice in a game in 1990.
It's true.
There really was fantasy football in the 90s.
I think he had like 300 yards and 3 touchdowns even. So as good as Tyreek Hill was in the first quarter, he had 203 receiving yards in the first quarter. I think he ended the game with 269. So he slowed down after his crazy first quarter, but he did have 3 touchdowns and 269 yards. That's an amazing game, but believe it or not, there have been better games than that.
Well, it's remarkable, too, to think about. And this comes up with my next big question to ask. everyone's headed into the fantasy football playoffs. There are some serious contenders that are ready to lock up number 1, number 2 seeds. And of course, there is a 7th seed this year, so only one bye will be given out. So hopefully it will stay competitive for some of those top teams deep down the stretch. I'm thinking about the Steelers and the Chiefs. But is this a time when you start to think and start to worry as a fantasy football owner that there are some teams that might be cutting back on their reps? Possibly. I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire on my team. I know that he was questioned to even perform very well down the stretch here. And people said, oh, bench him. But I mean, am I going to be worried that if I'm in the championship game or the semifinals of my fantasy football postseason, Tyreek Hill is going to get, his production's going to drop off because, he's being held out because they want to save him for the postseason?
Very valid point, especially at this point in the league, but or the season. I do believe that most teams don't even think about that until week 16 and 17. So 17 for sure. Like, I mean, as we've evolved in the fantasy world, we've now realized, hey guys, week 17, let's just eliminate that from the playoffs. So typically and you'll see this in a lot of leagues where there's experience in there is the playoffs start from week 14 and they end week 16. And that's the championship. Week 17 is such a crapshoot where even teams that are not in a playoff run will bench their players because, I mean, why risk your stud running back or wide receiver or even quarterback in the last week of a season that is not going to result in anything, even if you win by 100 points?
Yeah.
So that's why week 17 we've completely eliminated for the most part in a lot of fantasy leagues. But yes, it is a valid point for those guys that are driving your team, like the Tyreek Hills and Derrick Henry's, all those guys. You do want to start thinking about maybe looking at your bench and adding who the backup is, because there's still going to be productive offense. It's not like they just become crap in the last couple of weeks. There's still going to be a productive offense. It's just who's going to get the touches now. So those are the types of things you want to start thinking about. It does stink that you have to probably think about sitting those players in the championship week, but it's one of those things where you have to plan ahead. And when you have a player on a very successful team that's going to have their ticket punched in the playoffs already by week 15, then yeah, you need to think about those things and add depth to your teams.
Well, and on that note, let's look at the week 13 waiver wire pickups. Who is tops on Nate Hamilton's list as a must add for this crucial week before the fantasy football playoffs?
So for me, I don't normally like talking about the quarterback position because it's kind of like, all right, you've got your quarterback and you're set, and that's the deal. But I can't ignore what Kirk Cousins has done this season. He's thrown multiple touchdowns in his last 7 of 9 games, and he's thrown 3 touchdowns in 5 of those games. So he's had very impressive performances for a fantasy standpoint, and he just performed without Adam Thielen in the lineup, guys.
Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, he's the real deal. So he targeted a rookie, Justin Jefferson, who I love very much, by the way.
I had him in my DFS last week.
So you should be doing all right. But the thing is, when I looked up how much Kirk Cousins is rostered, he's only rostered in 40% of leagues.
Interesting.
So, I mean, to me, there's 60% of people missing out on the production that Kirk Cousins has been giving you the last 7 out of 9 weeks, where he's thrown multiple touchdown passes and he's just created, and like I said, 5 of those weeks, 3 touchdowns. So for me, he's definitely a must add at the quarterback position, which is honestly, it is the most valuable position. We try to downplay it in fantasy football, and that's why we have super flex leagues where you can have 2 quarterbacks, or we actually have 2 quarterback leagues to give more value to a valuable position in the NFL. yeah, I mean, I think it's time to start matching up what Kirk Cousins has done versus who you have at quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And to put the cherry on top, Kirk Cousins has just an amazing lineup of defenses to close out the season. So I think he's going to crush it in the fantasy playoffs. So there's 60% of you that do not have him. Go out and get him on your waiver wire.
Well, and certainly they're playing the Jaguars this weekend. 1:00 game at home, controlled environment inside that dome in Minneapolis. I'm just kind of scrolling through the rest of the slate for the Sunday games. And in between a matchup between the Colts and the Texans, Phillip Rivers, whether or not he's 100% healthy. I mean, the Colts have proven that they can come back from behind, but you just saw what Deshaun Watson is capable of doing, although he did lose Will Fuller for the rest of the season, testing positive for PEDs. Which quarterback would you take in that situation, Rivers, or would you take Watson?
It's still Watson, because for me, Watson has the safer floor and the higher ceiling. So I think that, he's both the safer pick and the higher upside pick as well. Phillip Rivers, no disrespect to what he's been doing there, but that offense is so unpredictable. Jonathan Taylor has a couple weeks ago, and you finally think, okay, they're handing it over to the rookie. It's game on. And then the next week, nothing out of him. Nyheim Hines was like amazing. The week after, nothing out of him. It is just completely unpredictable. And then, hey, all of a sudden now, last week, T.Y. Hilton has 80 plus yards and a touchdown, the old T.Y. Hilton, but he has been literally nothing this entire season.
I know.
So for me, I do like Phillip Rivers. But it's just that offense is just so unpredictable. And in fantasy football, especially this time of year when every game counts, you want predictability. And I think Deshaun Watson provides that safe floor, and he has been very hot, by the way. And the upside is just amazing. So it's not even close for me. It's Deshaun Watson.
That's a potential spoiler game for the Colts playoff chances, even though they're not going to catch the Titans in that division.
Right.
They play the Texans twice, so they better figure it out if they want to go to the postseason.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Deshaun Watson, I witnessed that with them watching the Patriots. Who else is on your waiver wire ads? I know that you picked up, or you noted, a lot of James White play in New England. Now, I mean, Damian Harris, he's still going to get the rock, 10, 12, 15 carries a game. But James White had a breakout game again. Well, I mean, as everyone expected him to,
of course,
because, the screen game for the Patriots was needed in those close situations. So is he high on your list for waiver wire pickup?
He absolutely is, because Rex Burkhead was one of those guys that was taking touches away from James White, who I believe is the better talent. Anyway, I think Rex Burkhead should be used, and he's out for the season, by the way. But so this is like past tense. But he should have been used in short yardage situations, because he does move the pile, and he's very good at that. He is very good at the passing downs as well, which is what has been taking touches away from James White. So we've seen now with Rex Burkhead out, James White scored his first 2 touchdowns of the year. So James White, to me, is as small as a move as Rex Burkhead being out. I know nobody's like, so what? Everyone's like, so what? But that just, all that means is now James White is monopolizing those third down situations, and he's talented enough to turn those things into fantasy points, as we've just seen in week 12. So I think James White for sure is an easy add off your waiver wire heading into week 13.
Wide receivers are so valuable down the stretch, especially since, you typically in a general PPR league, you can get two receivers and 1 flex. I throw another wide receiver in my flex just because there's so many this year. The league on pace to set record highs in passing yards and receiving yards. So who is hot on your wide receiver list for week 13? Who am I keying in on?
So I've got a couple. And one is very popular, except when you look at his roster percentage is at 56%, which means a little more than half of people own him or roster him, and the other half do not. And it's Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers.
Well, I think probably because Jimmy G went down. And Nick Mullins was a crapshoot for a long time, but yes.
Nick Mullins is actually performing. He's doing pretty well now.
Very well. Could the 49ers be back?
But it's also Deebo Samuel has been out with a hamstring injury, right? So he's been out. He hasn't played since week 7, and he came back huge for the 49ers. 11 out of 13 targets for 133 yards.
Crazy.
So, and then prior to his hamstring injury, though, he had 5 or more targets in weeks 5, 6, and 7, totaling 13 catches, 150 yards, and a touchdown in that span. So for me, Deebo Samuel is a must add. And I think it's one of those guys you want to pay up for. He's one of those guys that he was dropped because he was injured. Mm-hmm. And I think people like just panicked and they couldn't put him on IR for whatever reason, and they dropped him. And to your point, Jimmy G went down, which kind of, you throw your hands up when you have a Deebo Samuel that's already dealing with hamstring, and now their top quarterback goes out, so you drop them. But there's 44% of leagues that do not roster Deebo Samuel. He's a must add. Another wide receiver that I really like is Kiki Kuti, and you mentioned it earlier with Will Fuller being suspended, missing the remainder of the regular season. I think the Texans, for me, they just released Kenny Stills.
Yeah.
Right. So that leaves Brandon Cooks and Kiki Kuti as the main wideouts for Deshaun Watson, who I, again, have just mentioned is on fire.
Yeah.
Now, Kuti does have a pair of catches in his last 2 games. So, 2 catches in each of the last 2 games. It's not incredible. It's not, earth shaking.
Yeah.
But it does include a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. So Deshaun Watson is looking his way in the red zone. And I think now with Will Fuller and Kenny Stills out of the picture, Kuti is going to see some valuable touches going forward. And he.
We lost your sound. We got to wait until Nate unplugs and replugs again. Well, it's really interesting because when you're talking about the Houston Texans, that is really a team and a franchise that has been under so much fire, and not only the firing of Bill O'Brien, but letting go of the head of PR, and who was a woman so suddenly, and she was mortified, and it became so public. And now not only Will Fuller testing positive, but Bradley Roby, they lost him as well. And Romeo Crennel really taking a chance and putting himself out there as a serious potential candidate to become the permanent head coach when the season is done. But I think the most important thing, and you have to remember that Deshaun Watson went down with a torn ACL last year, and this is his bounce back year, kind of possibly a glimpse of what we could see when, Dak Prescott and Jimmy Garoppolo are fully healthy, obviously not to the severity of the injury that we saw, but Deshaun Watson, torn ACL. I mean, he is on fire, and I have a lot of power and faith in the Houston Texans to go out there and ruin someone's playoff chances. So, definitely a hot play on Kiki Kuti.
For sure. I know it's a fun name to say, right?
Fun name to say. I have a question. Should fantasy owners give up on Kenny Golladay? Is that project over? Or are we going to see a resurgence of the Lions? Because you got to remember, Darrell Bevell's taking over. That went from a defensive-minded coach in Matt Patricia to Darrell Bevell, who was, he did decide to throw the ball on second down at the goal line for the Seahawks many years ago, and the Patriots picked it off. Malcolm Butler, he was the guy that made that call. So, but I mean, that offense that year with the Seahawks was unstoppable, and Darrell Bevell has impressed a lot of people over the last few years, and now he's the interim coach for the Detroit Lions. So what kind of wrinkles can we see in that offense? And really, I mean, should people give up on Kenny Golladay?
I really hate that question because I love Kenny Golladay. I mean, I think his talent is just unbelievable. Injury-wise, that's what's been crushing him, right? I mean, And now with, Matthew Stafford working with a bum thumb, it does not help. It does not help his case for sure. And it's one of those things where if Kenny Golladay is healthy and he's playing, there's no question you have to play him. So he's one of those guys for me, especially heading into the fantasy playoffs. You cannot just drop him. You can't do it. Yeah. He's one of those guys you put on your bench, and then once he's healthy, Matthew Stafford's going to target him because he's just one of those elite guys. He's up there with, a DK Metcalf. He's, one of those types of guys where you just don't bench him and you take your losses when you can. So if he's healthy,
marinating on my bench for a long time though.
I know. I know. But the truth is he's worth that bench spot. If in fact you make the playoffs and he comes back and he's healthy, Matthew Stafford, he's going to target him because it's not like Marvin Jones, who was incredible last year, has not been the guy that Matthew Stafford targeted last year. It's like
Marvin Hall more so. And I think he went down with injury kind of quick. I know that he just was, whether or not he was banged up, he kind of limped off the field. But
right.
That's something to look at. And speaking of tight ends, I mean, is TJ Hawkinson, who's the top of your list? I feel like tight end is so hit or miss these days. But
it is.
TJ Hawkinson, is he hot on your list, or Robert Tonyan? Who's the tight end on the rise?
No, I know Tonyan just scored a touchdown, and but for me,
tight ends haven't been that exciting this year. Outside of Travis Kelce, it's like
it's awful.
Kelce, that's it, and everything else is a crapshoot.
I think I even said this last week when you and I were talking, is that like every time I write an article and I include the tight end position, I'm always like, I know it's an awful landscape out there in tight ends. However, you should look toward this guy, or you should be dropping somebody you think was going to be awesome. And guys, it's week 13. It's not awesome anymore. But for sure, I think Hawkinson is one of the few tight ends that I will continue to trust. Especially with the, Kenny Golladay woes, as we were just talking about. I think that he's really benefited from that. But he was also a big, promise heading into this season. And Hawkinson has been pretty valuable at the tight end position. And it's funny how much you have to lower your standards when we talk tight ends, because when you're like, hey, he's got 3 receptions in each of his last 4 games, like Kyle Rudolph, who's one of those guys. But I mean, where the market is, you need to speak to that. And even though it's not sexy, it's one of those things that if you want to get the most out of each of your positions, you need to pay attention to those things, even if it is the lowest of, fantasy sexiness. You need to still pay attention to those things. For me, Kyle Rudolph is one of those guys. He's coming off his best game of the season, which is crazy, right? It's like 7 receptions for 68 yards.
Yeah.
That's like a meh game for any wide receiver. But for the tight end position,
Waller really screwed me in DFS.
Oh my God. Yeah. What do you have? 1 reception?
Yeah.
For like 13 yards or something? He's like, that was not a good game for Waller again. But that was the whole Derek Carr situation where he should have unbelievably been great in that game against the Falcons. Yeah. And, it's going back to the whole, like, we know nothing, right? when those things happen, we know nothing. And, that's the beauty of the NFL, though. It's completely unpredictable. We do our best to analyze trends and look at things and say, hey, look what they've done the last 3 to 4 weeks. And they're going against a favorable matchup. You need to play this guy. And often it will pay out. I'm not going to, there's logic behind everything that we all spew. But again, the unpredictability of the NFL just bites us every once in a while. And that's one of those things.
Yeah. Some of those quarterbacks putting up zeros once a week.
Ridiculous.
And I seem to catch them all the time. I'm not saying that I'm the bad luck charm here, but yeah, again, it's one of those unpredictable seasons with fantasy quarterbacks. All right, let's get to the Ask Me Anything section of the show.
All right.
And I got a guy named A. Erickson, and he said Nate Hamilton is the GOAT, and I couldn't agree more.
Thank
Shout
you.
out to all your fans, man. You got plenty in the stands. All right,
That's my buddy Andrew from we roomed at one of the fantasy football shows in Dallas, and thank you, buddy. I appreciate that.
Oh, okay. All right. This one comes from the YouTube page. James Hayden says, "Can I trust Tyler Boyd again for the rest of the season?"
Oh man, no. No. That is the safe answer. Just because of their options there. It was a Brandon Allen now that's throwing for the. It was either him or Ryan. What's his name?
No, that's a
kicker. Whatever, man. I mean, that right there. That just proves your points for who's throwing in Cincinnati. No, I don't like questions in a vacuum. I have to know who else it is that you can possibly replace Boyd with.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely leaning no, and I think that there's plenty of guys like a Kiki Kuti, who all of a sudden just had Kenny Stills released from the team, and now Will Fuller out, who just got a massive bump in an offense with Deshaun Watson throwing to him. He's one of those guys you should probably be targeting in the waiver wire tonight. So go ahead and do that. Good question. Go and target Kiki Kuti and probably play him instead of Boyd.
Yeah, I'm sure. And even if you're in a 10, 12 team league, there are still waiver wire steals. I picked up Michael Pittman the other week.
Nice.
Michael Pittman, and excuse me, that's looking like the steal of the postseason. I keep seeing him as a waiver wire target. All right. I hear, no, I'm the GOAT. This is another question from YouTube. Is DJ playing? I'm assuming that's DJ Moore.
DJ Moore playing for week 13?
Yes.
I mean, I've not heard anything outside of him not playing. So for me, he's one of those guys you keep in your roster. And if for whatever reason, it's one of those things you have to track them, and you can at me or Courtney on Twitter.
Yeah.
And ask us as the game comes closer to it. But it's one of those things where it's way too early. I mean, it's realistically
reports. You got to look at if they're limited in practice, if they're a full go. I know that, if someone's coming off an injury, you're not just going to get full participation marks on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But there's
the biggest
to be said about, how much they get during the week as well. Limited participations or DNPs and
exactly. And that's a great point, because for me, when it comes to practices, Wednesdays are kind of like, okay, pique your interest, right? If they don't play, pique your interest if they don't participate in practice on Wednesday.
Yeah.
But Thursday, if they have a game scheduled for Sunday and they don't practice on Thursday, huge red flag.
Yeah.
You want to start looking for an alternate right away. And then, obviously sometimes it's a game time decision depending on what time the game's being played. It's one of those things you already should have a backup plan at that point if they don't practice on Thursday. So it is Tuesday right now. It's a live show. So I can't predict the future. If DJ Moore does not play or practice on Thursday, definitely start looking for backups.
Okay. Well, this comes to a question that we were discussing yesterday. Yesterday. So long.
It's been a long week.
Started the show. DK Dobbins, he had 15 carries at 18.5 points in their game last week, even with Mark Ingram playing. Has the full shift worked towards Dobbin? Has that begun towards the rookie?
I believe so. And I think I would hope that the Ravens are a better organization than the Indianapolis Colts, because it was one of those things where, Courtney, we talked about it last week. Week 12, week 13, we're starting getting into that time of the season where it's just like, okay, you drafted these rookies, right, at a high price. It was not cheap for any of these guys. It's kind of like put up or shut up. And I said that last week. So for me, I thought, what was it, 19 carries for Jonathan Taylor for the Indianapolis Colts last week? And I thought that, they're now turning the page and saying, all right, this is our future. We need to start feeding him the ball. And he was highly productive with those touches. And then all of a sudden he becomes nothing.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it's the opposite for JK Dobbins. I think I'm truly believing, because it's more so of the decline I've seen in Mark Ingram, where he used to be super effective. And now with his touches, he's kind of just looked mediocre compared to JK Dobbins. JK Dobbins has more of a burst when he touches the ball. He should be the guy getting the majority of the carries. And I do think that the Ravens know that. And I believe that they have turned the page. So yes, to answer your question, I think JK Dobbins is the guy to own in Baltimore, even though their game is questionable for tomorrow night. But he is eligible to play. So if you have him, obviously you can't sub him out for anybody else really, unless you have another Ravens running back. But I think JK Dobbins is the guy to go with heading forward.
Mine as well. I mean, it still counts towards week 12, the longest week in fantasy football history. I'm not complaining. We have football. By the end of the season, we'll have football on every single day of the week.
True.
Yeah. So
that's one positive, I guess, right?
Yeah, for sure. All right. Someone else is asking, Jerry Jeudy or Darius Slayton?
Oh man.
Well, I would probably, if I could answer this, it's not.
Sure.
They're saying that the hamstring injury to Daniel Jones is not as serious as they expected. However, hamstring injuries are tricky, and I wouldn't be targeting anyone on that Giants offense right now.
All right, so I'm going to answer the question. Ready? So Jeudy or Slayton?
Yeah.
If Drew Lock cannot play because the health of the Denver quarterbacks has been in question.
Mm-hmm.
But if Lock can play, it's absolutely Jeudy. If Lock cannot play, the answer is Kiki Kuti. So, guys,
I'm gonna make you t-shirts, Fantasy Dilemma, and then on the back it's just gonna be named Kiki.
Yeah, you know what? If you tell me this guy or this guy, but I think there's an option C that's so much better, then I'm gonna go with that option C, who is likely on your waiver wire. So for me, it's Kiki Kuti. I can't trust Slayton. But if literally, like, to answer the question seriously, and that was serious actually, but to answer the question, if it truly is between those two guys, if Drew Lock is playing, it's Jeudy. If not, it's Slayton.
Yeah.
And I'm not happy about Slayton though.
Yeah, no, for sure. Is Kenyan Drake back?
God, I hope so.
I mean, he's been, I saw him, he was getting a lot of handoffs at the goal line during that Patriots game. And although questionable coaching calls at the end of that one kind of put the Arizona Cardinals' chances on ice, I would say, right, if I would be, leaning towards the running game for Arizona, since Kyler Murray is kind of working through a shoulder issue. What are your thoughts?
Well, for me, I mean, Kenyan Drake, he was one of my favorite guys heading into the season. I had him ranked very high as a running back one. And it's just been super inconsistent in this offense, unfortunately. But, he scored 2 touchdowns last week. And he had 22 carries on 78 yards, which is only 3.5 yards per carry. Mm-hmm. The week prior to that, only 2.6 yards per carry on 11 carries. He had 29 yards, but he did score a touchdown.
Yeah.
So I think what happens is people look too much at the end stat and like, oh, okay, good. He got me 12 fantasy points. I'm good with that. I'm going to keep playing him.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where, he has been a Patriots killer, even back in his days with Miami Dolphins. He had that miracle win for the Dolphins against the Patriots, if you remember.
Don't remind me. Yes.
So, and I know you're a Patriots fan. So, but Drake just had a fantastic game. To me, he's a matchup play. You have to look at what defense he's playing. How have they been against the run? He's to me, I wish I could trust him 100% of the time, but for me, it's one of those things where I think it's just kind of fool's gold the last couple of weeks. Yeah. So I don't believe he's 100% back until they say, okay, you're a guy, we're giving you the touches, and it just hasn't happened consistently.
Okay. Our last question of the show. And anytime that you want to ask questions that we can bring to the show, we had a couple questions before, just at me, Courtney Fallon, and at Dominate Nate
FF.
Fantasy Football King.
That's right.
Here. And our lines are always open at the Game Day NFL. And of course, checking out your articles on thegameday.com.
Yep.
A lot of fantasy football information there. So always a resource to find. Our last question of the show is Wayne Gallman a running back RB1 going forward? Hopefully they have DeAndre Swift, which we were talking about with the Lions coming back too, who goes into an RB2 behind Chubb. So a lot of pieces in that.
Okay. First off, Wayne Gallman, you have to play the guy. I mean, he's just nonstop productive.
I've always been a big Wayne Gallman guy.
So especially with Daniel Jones, and we're talking about the injury that he's got. Even if he plays, if he doesn't, Wayne Gallman's going to be the guy there. I mean, he's getting, and I said this last week, where the New York Giants are surprisingly getting, touches near the end zone. They're not a very good football team, guys. I don't know if this is, the NFC East. Even the best team is the worst team in the NFL, right? I mean, we're kind of looking at that kind of situation.
Team. I have my faith in them.
But Wayne Gallman is the one guy that I want to own or roster in, fantasy football. So for me, Wayne Gallman, RB1, that's tough to say because he has not put up the yardage, to be an RB1. You got to be like a Dalvin Cook kind of guy to have that title, but he hovers right around it. I'm not going to lie. He's between 12 and 15, I think, probably rest of the season for Wayne Gallman, given his opportunity and what he's been doing with those touches. So I would say Wayne Gallman is about an RB1. It's like he's right there on the cusp of an RB1. And then, so what was the other stuff? It was like Swift, hopefully coming back.
Swift. Can you rely on him? I know that he's coming back from an injury. DeAndre Swift was, he got 150 yards the first time that he started.
Yeah.
Coming back. And, having Adrian Peterson there, it's just like pulling teeth, man. I know that you're a legend, but, it's like him and Frank Gore. Are they ever going to hang it up?
These teams.
Give them RB1 touches. That's
so
why both of those teams are terrible.
That's true. I mean, these teams love to give the old guys just the glory. Hey, score another freaking touchdown for your retirement numbers. It was crazy what Adrian Peterson, 2 touchdowns on Thanksgiving when Swift kind of carried the whole team.
Yeah, exactly.
So who goes into RB2 behind Chubb? He's asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, all right, for me, I would probably go with Swift just because I think it was, their coach was just fired.
Yeah, no, I get Darryl Bevell.
So Patricia's gone.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's going to be a resurgence of that Lions offense, and they're just going to put up massive points. So something to think about going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what happens when those things happen with coaches and coaches get fired, whoever is the interim, they love to put the hands of the most talented players. And until Kenny Galladay comes back, like we were talking about, I think it's DeAndre Swift. So yeah, I think I would continue playing DeAndre Swift, even though it's an ugly situation in Detroit.
Yeah. All right. And on that note, that's the end of our show. I hope you all enjoyed our fantasy dilemma for week 13. Kiki Kuti. Go check him out. Because I mean, I don't. It's almost like you said his name 15 times during the show. So
go do it.
Listen. I'm gonna maybe play him in my DFS just because you said that. I know we'll talk off air just to so I can double back some of my.
You can Venmo me whatever percentage. I'll take 20%.
20%. Perfect. Poetic justice right there. All right. Well, just a reminder to all of you, I'm Courtney Fallon. That's Nate Hamilton. But if you want to check out all of our fantasy football stuff, go check out thegameday.com. And then even with the daily fantasy plays with DraftKings, you can check out our website and go see what some of the affiliates that we have associated with the game day are offering you, possibly for single game DFS, for week 13 DFS. But of course, only do it in states where gambling is legal. Nate, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, I mean, just good luck to everybody who has a Raven or a Steeler, and just pray that this game actually happens so your points are recorded for week 12, because if not, it's going to be pretty ugly for the fantasy football world, at least. And you know, I'm thinking of everybody, and for that reason, I did not play Juju Smith-Schuster in like half my leagues.
Okay.
So I hope you planned ahead, and if you didn't, God bless you.
It's only been about a week since we had this issue.
I know.
So I think that they did heed your advice, and I think they might have you know, held out on any of the Steelers and Ravens.
I hope so.
Played their cards right. All right, that's it for our show. We'll see you next time.
Cheers, guys.